Good evening, everybody. This is Dumpster Cat. Welcome back to yet another Pioneer video. In this one, we do not have a gameplay video, rather we have more of an analysis-focused video, as over the past weekend we had a couple challenge placements with the Golgari Midrange The Rock by a few separate users, which is very exciting to see. You love to see it, and of course this video we will be diving really deep into each of these deck lists. We have, I believe, 3 in total. They are all pretty similar with a few separate changes or I guess differences between them, so of course we will get into that. I have a lot of opinions. This is going to be a pretty interesting video, as I'm a bit scared to show kind of, I guess, relay my opinions to you guys, just because the archetype right now is pretty, or of course just has always been very not concrete, and it's really hard to form like really astute and focused opinions on the card choices, how we think the Rock is going to play in the metagame overall, certain matchups, how we want to take down certain matchups, things like that. So I'm a bit scared to make this video, but also very excited, just because getting these challenge placements, and of course we also got an RC placement and a prelim placement actually that happened yesterday as of recording this video, which is really exciting. And yeah, going to be diving really deep into each of these deck lists, and I hope you guys enjoy. Alright, so let's get right into it. This first list comes to us by jwoods36, so of course all credit goes to them for this one. They were able to get a 6th place challenge placement on the October 1st challenge, so really cool, very exciting, of course, as we know. Just increasingly we are seeing the power of Mosswood Dread Knights. We kind of already thought that, or pretty much already knew as this card was leaked, that this was going to be a big boost for our archetype, and it is just very exciting that we are vindicated in that sense of this card just as a very proactive 2-drop that is can be aggressive, can be more card advantage oriented. Is just has been so crucial for us in pushing these results and pushing these 5-0 league placements, these of course challenge placements. We even see here we have a an RC placement and a prelim placement. Not sure if I already mentioned that as well. So really cool. Dread Knight is really allowing us to see kind of Golgari midrange coalesce into a more concrete form, which is really exciting. Certain card choices have been a bit lackluster in the past in terms of the 2-drop slot. We've had to play around with cards like Deeproot Wayfinder, Armored Scrapgorger, Misery Shadow. Pretty interestingly enough, the separate users, have a pretty different scale of what they wanted to see in their 2-drops, besides Mosswood Dread Knight, of course. So of course we will get into that. But really, just like, if anything comes out of this video, it's going to be that Mosswood Dread Knight has just been really exciting for us, a very powerful card, and of course with these challenge placements, it is just even more so exciting and very crucial for us to kind of acknowledge going forward. Besides that, though, the only other 2-drop this user opted to go for was just a simple one of Scavenging Ooze, which is pretty interesting. I guess we do have the 2 Bank Busters here as well, which you could kind of count as 2-drop creatures, but also not really. Skooz has, of course, always been on our radar in this archetype. For me, I've been a bit lower on it, just because I found it to be a bit too slow, and if we kind of assess the metagame right now as very generally speaking focused around Mono Green and Rakdos Sacrifice as kind of like the 2 main, I guess of course Rakdos Midrange is of course as well, but mainly Sacrifice and Mono Green we've been seeing a lot of lately. I do think that Sacrifice is going down in stock just a bit, and Rakdos Midrange is going up a bit in stock, and so maybe in that sense we want to be looking at Skooz just a bit more. But when just taking it at face value, very generally speaking, if we want to be targeting Mono Green and Rakdos Sacrifice, we want to be playing Misery Shadow. I do feel pretty strongly about that. Misery Shadow just has been super good for me against those matchups, and I think a card like Skooz is oftentimes just a bit too slow. However, of course, this is a challenge placement, very exciting for us to see, and of course the Skooz is just a one of. And this user pretty much opted to go for more utility in their discard spells and their interactive spells, rather than going for, I suppose, more of an aggressive route with these 2-drop creatures, or more of a versatile route with the 2-drop creatures. And so in that sense, they're not necessarily targeting, it seems like, a specific matchup, rather just going for a more robust overall strategy that can be really target pretty much any matchup that comes against them. Besides that, though, we are seeing some pretty stock inclusions, of course, from this user with 3 Glissa, 3 Shieldred. This is, I think, pretty stock at this point. In my adventures list, I kind of found that I didn't really like Glissa, but that's just because we had Love Struck Beast as kind of an alternative 3-drop that was just a bit more powerful, at least in my findings. But, of course, I think with the Rock, just stock Golgari midrange, no adventures, nothing fancy like that. I do think triple Glissa and triple Shieldred, of course, alongside the full playset of Dread Knights, is just going to be our foundation and where we want to base all of our creatures around. And so I think going forward, that's going to be really, really important to know. But yeah, besides those creatures, this user has opted to go for a pretty interesting interaction suite. Of course, the full playset of Liliana of the Veil is, I think, where I want to be starting with this one. I think what this is telling me is that, of course, we have an incredible Rakdos midrange matchup, or just any midrange matchup in general, with the Dread Knights. Of course, Dread Knight, as we've seen in my leagues or any other leagues with this card, it's so insanely good against midrange. If they don't have like a shadow or any way of exiling it, this card can really, really pop off. The life loss is something to consider, which I'm sure we'll touch on in this video. But just for Liliana, for Dread Knight, we instantly have such a good mid-range matchup, as these cards are just so mid-range, card advantage oriented. And so I really like that. Liliana is, I think, pretty poor against Sacrifice, and just okay against Mono Green. So in that sense, I don't entirely like her. But aggro is kind of on the down low right now. Not many people are playing humans, or even spirits for that matter, if you want to consider that an aggressive deck. And so in that sense, Liliana does get a bit better, as I do think she's not entirely the best against more aggressive decks. I do think that having maybe like 1 or 2 copies of her, especially post-sideboard, is okay in those types of more aggressive matchups. Just because she could be a bit slow, and we just definitely want to be more efficient. We want to be playing like Glissa on turn 3 much more than Liliana. But, in that sense, I think that Liliana, with, of course, the aggressive decks being a bit less overall present in the meta, Liliana is a great choice, and I think I definitely do not scoff at this user for going for the full playset, which is really cool. But yeah, other than that, like, this interaction suite is really, really interesting. Right off the bat, of course, we have the full 4 push, 4 Thoughtseize, but alongside this playset of Thoughtseize, we are seeing a 2 copies of Duress, which is really, really interesting. Of course, Rakdos midrange is able to go, I think oftentimes most lists just play 1 Duress in the main deck. I am always just very wary of playing a card like this in the main deck, of course, just because we do have the possibility of whiffing, which is not incredibly unlikely in this metagame. And of course, when it comes to challenge placements, or just league placements over like 5-0 league placements, these lists are not like end-all be-all. Like, this is definitely what we should be playing, especially considering that Golgari midrange is definitely in its infancy right now. So of course, take everything with a grain of salt, especially when it comes to more, I think, niche choices like this, where we are playing, or this user is playing, 6 discard spells in the main deck, and then I guess it seems like none in the sideboard, which is really interesting, I guess, besides the go blanks. But yeah, really interesting. I'm not incredibly sure what the user wanted to target for this, if it's just like wanting to have better control matchup, or Lotus Field, or creativity, whatever it may be. I don't really like this against Mono Green. I don't really like this against Sacrifice. So I'm not incredibly sure what the user is wanting to kind of target with this, the 2 Duresses, the full 6 discard spells in the main deck. But it's pretty cool. It definitely reminds me of the olden days of modern Golgari midrange, where you have Inquisition of Kozilek, of course, and you're playing like 6, 7, even 8 discard spells at some points. So it's pretty interesting, pretty cool, very cool. But I'm just a little bit suspect of this. Of course, going forward, we will see how other users are kind of targeting, or rather going about the discard suite, as I think that the one aspect that Rakdos has over us, in the sense that they can play a bit more discard spells on average than us, is they just have blood tokens, quite simply, and they have Fable Chapter 2 to filter those discard spells out of their hand if in the late game they're not relevant, or if you're playing game 1 against an aggressive deck and you have to rest, you could just of course, cycle it away with the blood token, and we do not have that. We do have pretty nice card advantage elsewhere, which is definitely nothing to scoff at, and definitely something we should be considering when addressing, maybe our increased ability to kind of go more all in on these discard spells, or rather these niche effects. So we should be considering that, but of course I'm a bit suspect just at the moment. And then kind of along those lines, I really, really love this triple abrupt decay from this user. I have been really, really high on decay. I've been just increasing my amounts in my own rock lists at the moment, and I feel pretty vindicated, of course, with this user placing pretty well with this list and going for kind of all in, or not all in, they're not playing 4, but triple decay is pretty, I think, a pretty standout element of this list, which I think I really like. I know I've been saying it a lot, but mono green and sacrifice are very popular in the meta right now, and decay I think is just our best piece of removal against them. Hits Kiora, hits Wolf Willow Haven, any mana dork, Mayhem Devil, Fable tokens. It just hits really, really just everything that we want it to hit in the meta right now. And then elsewhere, against humans, against spirits, it's really nice. I think against spirits, it's the most premium removal spell, being uncounterable. So I think this makes a lot of sense to me personally. And it's really interesting that this user is opting to go for, I guess, just like more lower to the ground removal spells overall, and then perhaps targeting the higher cost of mana value cards with the discard spells. Not sure how entirely relevant that kind of conversation is, but interesting to think about nonetheless. Of course, we do also see 2 Gore for the Throats, which I do think is probably the best removal spell. I maybe would like to see one of these and then 1 Heartless Act. I think that may just be a bit more correct, but honestly it doesn't matter too much. And then 1 of the End, which is really interesting. This was a bit on my radar when it was spoiled as it is a new card. I'm not sure if I'm completely sold on it. Just being pretty much like a kicked Terror Sender for creatures of Planeswalkers in the main deck. 4 mana, it's a lot. Instant speed is nice, and of course the upside of kind of getting us out of a hard situation if we have 5 or less life is not entirely irrelevant. But I'm not really sure exactly what we need this. It's pretty good against Shieldred, good against Karn, things like that. But I think we just have alternative ways of interacting with those cards, or just with those archetypes in general. So I don't think that this card is necessarily necessary, but really cool nonetheless, and I do not mind it. Yeah, I guess what would it be? The 7th removal spell, I guess in the 2-drop slot, that is Virtue of Persistence. A pretty interesting one, which again I'm not completely sold on. We may see here that this user is kind of going more experimental with the Wilds of Eldraine cards. I haven't even touched upon Tortoise, but we do have one of those. I will get to that, don't you worry. 1 the End of 1, and then 1 Virtue of Persistence. So maybe this user is kind of course going a bit more experimental, just testing these new cards out just in the 1-ofs. So kind of take that with a grain of salt. But I think this card is pretty sweet, right? Gains us life in the early game, gets rid of creatures, gets rid of Fable tokens, right? Sucks that it is 2 mana and sorcery speed, but of course the late game upside of this just being an incredibly difficult to interact with enchantment that is going to give us a lot of card advantage is really sweet, and I think that it's a pretty cool inclusion that I wouldn't scoff at any of you guys for playing, or even myself for that matter. But yeah, I think overall pretty interesting list. Of course, I guess I will touch on the Tortoise. Tortoise kind of like opens up a whole new conversation with this list in specific that I think can go kind of I guess under-identified, if that makes sense, just at face value. But this user definitely is kind of opting to go for a more utility-styled mana base. With 25 lands, the Tortoise kind of helps out just a bit. Of course, like I just said, may just be like a one-off, I want to try this card out. But if we're looking at it at more of an analytical perspective, we do have a lot of utility that works extremely well with Tortoise, specifically with just the Field of Ruins. So of course we can recur the Field of Ruins with Tortoise, same thing with like Deep-Root Wayfinder, if you are familiar with that interaction. Field of Ruin is really, really interesting. Also, this user is going for a lair over Hive over Restless Cottage, which is really interesting. So I'm not sure exactly what I want to be saying about that. I don't think lair is incredibly too useful. And I think I'd rather just have a card like Hive or just pretty much Restless Cottage, right? But could be wrong. I really don't think I like the layers, especially alongside the 6 discard spells. But I may be wrong, of course. But yeah, good. Getting back to the Field of Ruins, I really do like this. Of course, Field of Ruin, us being a mid-range deck that does not have access to blood tokens or treasure tokens, getting Revolt on Fatal Push is pretty difficult. And so I really like this user's use a Field of Ruin in the sense of getting, of course, Revolt for Fatal Push more easily. Of course, Fabled Passage does that as well. We see a 1 of here. And then we see a lot of basics. So 2 Forest, 3 Swamp. I really dislike the 3 Overgrown Tomb, I am going to be honest. 4 Blooming Marsh is pretty cool. I think does make sense in this more Lords of the Ground version, where we are topping out at just 3 Shieldred. 2 Deathcap Glade, and then no Pathways is also pretty an interesting inclusion. I'm not really sure how I feel, or if I have a very concrete mana base in mind going forward with Golgari midrange. I definitely think that I like the Pathways, and I like my Glades, and my, of course, I think 4 Overgrown Tomb has to be stock at this point. Lanamore Wastes is another one that's been on my mind, which can be pretty interesting and pretty relevant, especially if we are wanting to go down a route that includes more discard spells in the main deck. So that could be, another one that, of course, produces both black and green in the early game, like Blooming Marsh does, and Overgrown Tomb, just a bit of a cost of life. But yeah, so things I like and dislike about this mana base for sure, like the fields. I do kind of like the 1 Fabled Passage. Of course, works well with the Tortoise. I'm not sure entirely how relevant or entirely how meaningful that interaction was with this user, but pretty interesting nonetheless. And of course, I don't really like the 2 layers, and I don't really like the triple Overgrown Tomb. But with that being said, I think, I guess rounding at the main deck, 2 Bankbusters is pretty sweet. Again, just like going alongside the playsets of Liliana and Dread Knights, this list I'm sure has an incredible matchup against Rakdos. I guess the Duresses kind of take that away just a bit, but Bankbuster really just solidifies that, and I think it's pretty cool. Going forward, we may want to be going a bit slower in terms of just our overall game plan. And I don't think that means having a higher curve like I've been kind of doing with Questing Beast recently. I think that definitely means going more down a route of we are playing more Bankbusters, and we're just rounding out the curve with 3 Shielders, and I think no other 4-drops. Tortoise is really cool. A lot of other 4-drops are really cool, like QB, like Cletus, Sorin, whatever. But I think if we really want like a really streamlined deck list, I'm not incredibly sure that we do want more 4-drops than Shieldred, kind of like how Rakdos does. Like they just top the curve out at 4 with triple Shieldred, and I think that's probably what we want to be doing going forward as well. And then finally, the sideboard of this list in particular is interesting. I don't necessarily like it too much. I don't really know how it beats mono green. It's kind of like basically my fundamental like basis of understanding of this sideboard. We only have 1 extinction event, and then like I'm not even sure what else we would bring against mono green. We can technically bring in the Terror Senders, which aren't terrible, but other than that, like I don't really like how, like, especially if we're not playing Shadow, or even just like a couple more Scoozes, or even just 1 more Scooz in the main deck. I feel like our mono green matchup is definitely not the best game 1, especially with the 4 Liliana of the Veils. If we're like on the draw game 1 against mono green, and we have Liliana of the Veil, and like don't draw our Scooz and draw Duresses, it's going to be a really difficult game to win. And I don't really like the sideboard plan post side against mono green. I usually like having 1 needle, 2 to 3 extinction event against or for them with that matchup, and so I'm not really sure about that. Of course, this is a challenge placement, so of course the user definitely has some authority here, but that's kind of my opinion right there. 3 Ray of Enfeeblement this is a card we haven't seen in quite a while. It's like basically for Greasefang and Mono White, which are 2 decks that I haven't really been seeing at all recently. I've been seeing a few Humans players, but Humans is definitely not too good in the meta right now. I think its win rate is below 50% at the moment. And so I'm not sure if this card is really something we need to be looking at, especially when we already have, I feel like, a pretty decent game 1 against Humans. And yeah, otherwise, with like especially going along the lines of the 2 Hearses, the 1 Ashiok, and the 2 Go-Blanks, looks like this opponent, or rather, I keep on saying the opponent, this user, JWoods36, wanted to target potentially Phoenix and maybe Greasefang a bit as well. But yeah, Phoenix is definitely a matchup that can kind of be difficult for us in the past, or has been difficult for us in the past, but definitely is winnable. Post sideboard, of course, we kind of have the choice of having a good or bad matchup against them, and it seems like this user definitely wanted a good matchup against them with those graveyard cards that I just outlined. Really quickly, Chariot Throne. I don't think these cards are really that necessary if we already have a very robust game 1, or I guess just main deck game plan against Sacrifice, or rather mid-range, that is. I guess Sacrifice as well with Chariot and Throne. They aren't that bad in that matchup. But yeah, otherwise, I definitely wanted to touch on this Ashiok. This is some pretty cool tech against Lotus Field that I've played Ashiok against Lotus Field in the past, and I think I really like it at a theoretic level. I'm not really sure in practice how it really plays out, as I haven't tested it out too much. But I definitely like this over a card like Damping Sphere, just because their sideboard interaction for our sideboard cards often come in the form of like extra Besagers or Terror Senders, or just like artifact and enchantment removal. And so in that sense, having a Planeswalker that disallows the opponent from, searching with Dark Petition or things like that, I think is really crucial and just pretty much stops their combo. Of course, the -1 can even be relevant if we are worried about a Liar or things like that. So definitely like Ashiok on that sense, and I think that moving forward, I do want to test out more Ashiok, just because Lotus Field has always been prominent throughout Pioneer's history, I think, for the most part, but it has kind of like waxed and waned just a bit. I think that deck is a bit more popular at the moment, and so I think that, of course, like a card like this is going to be a metagame call. Of course, sideboards in general are just going to be entirely metagame calls, but I think I definitely like having Ashiok here in the sideboard, at least at the moment. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up for this list in specific. JWoods36, of course, all credit goes to them, and of course congratulations to them for getting this extremely cool challenge placement with the rock. Very exciting. I think we could take a lot of ideas away from this, at a very basic level of understanding. 4 Dread Knight, 3 Kalista, 3 Shield Druid, I think is pretty stock for sure. I like the Lilianas, I love the Decays. I am pretty interested in testing out Field of Ruin a bit more, now that we kind of, I've always liked this card in the rock, but now that we kind of have this more robust placement in the meta, I kind of feel a bit more, confident registering this card, so that's pretty sweet. Otherwise, I don't really like the mana base or the sideboard, but of course, I think that's kind of just up to the user's preference for the most part, so that's pretty cool, and let's go on to the next one. Alright, so the next one, also placed in that same challenge, it's by Doomwake, which is really cool. I love to see Doomwake, popular streamers, testing out the black-green archetype. Definitely just pushes it forward in the community and in the meta overall. And they went 10th. I think, if I believe it to be correct, they actually lost to JWoods in the mirror, which is pretty interesting. So, which I think I definitely have a lot to say about that. Not entirely relevant, of course, but yeah, really cool that Doomwake is on this archetype, and I think that I prefer this list. I don't know, it's definitely hard to say. I think I prefer it more than Jay Woods' list, just on a bit more of a foundational level, just like with the mana base, with the sideboard, with some of the main deck inclusions. But some of these cards, like Lord Skater, I'm not really sure if we want to be playing a card like this. I do think that Trespasser is probably just a bit better, especially in a world of Rakdos and a world where we, I guess this does have main deck graveyard interaction, but I think Trespasser is just like the card that's gonna end games quicker than Lord Skitter, but it's a pretty sweet inclusion. And of course, do make 1/10, so I'm not sure if he liked this card, but it's pretty interesting nonetheless. But yeah, things that I really, really like about this deck list are the shadows. I do think 4 is too many. I would go for 3 personally. Like 2 or 3 I think is a good spot for us moving forward, but love the shadows. It definitely seemed like with 4 Shieldred, 4 Shadow, Doomik definitely knew what he wanted to be kind of coming prepared for, in the sense of, these are 2 cards that are very powerful in the meta. Shadow being great against sacrificing green, like I pointed out earlier, and like we pretty much all know about. And then Shieldred just being a max value card that we want to be seeing in every game. Personally, I don't really agree with the playsets. I would, like, of course, I've done it before and I have been pretty happy with it, but I think like we may get into the mindset of Rakdos a bit too much if we're going for like full 4 playsets of cards like this, where, like, of course we don't have Fable, we don't have Blood Tokens, so we can't discard extra copies in that more like efficient sense. Of course, Doomik is also playing 3 Liliana of the Veils, not the playset like Jay Woods did, but of course we can, discard extra copies of Shieldred to Liliana, which is a nice interaction. But I'm not really sure if 4 is definitely where we want to be at, and I think that 3 is probably just like the more streamlined and I guess more effective route that we want to be going with Shieldred. But Shieldred are so stupid in this meta game and just overall as a card, so it's kind of hard to argue not playing 4, I suppose you could say as well. So maybe it's just a personal preference, as is a lot of what it comes down to with Golgari midrange, perhaps unfortunately so, but it's pretty cool nonetheless, of course. Yeah, of course, I guess elsewhere with the creatures, we have 1 of Gix and 1 of Murderous Rider. Love the Murderous Rider, really sweet, very versatile. Of course, like Liliana, very mid-range oriented, so I love that about it. Gix as well. I think this is really cool. Gix, usually we never see this card. I think it's usually pretty good if we're playing Mana Dorks, which I think we're never doing. But in this specific list, where we do have 8 2-drops, Gix seems really sweet. And of course, I think this is the type of card where we want it to be, it's more conditional in the sense that we have to kind of orient our deck around it just a bit more, at least in terms of, the main deck. Like Doomik did, playing 8 2-drops, I think works really well alongside Gix, and honestly wouldn't even mind seeing another 1 copy of a card like this, if we are potentially expecting more mid-range in the meta, or I guess even more, yeah, I guess more mid-range in the meta for overall. But yeah, really like that. I think that's pretty cool, and I definitely like to see more niche cards like this getting play and seeing results. Another thing I love about this list is the removal suite. This is, I kind of also feel pretty vindicated for, Doomik going down this route of just going for extreme versatility in the removal suite and acknowledging that these cards are powerful, extremely powerful individually, but are very conditional, or not very conditional, but can be conditional, especially with Edict and Decay being potentially the the 2 most conditional effects. I do believe, like I said previously, Decay is really well oriented right now, and so I don't think it's like the most conditional out of them. I think that would probably be Edict, but of course these cards have varying levels of success on each board state in each specific matchup, and so I do like going for like just 1 of each. I think that makes a lot more sense. The downside of that, though, is we don't really have like a specific game plan going forward, at least in terms of how we really want to be seeing our removal suites. That's kind of why I like Jay Woods' Triple Decay and just like 2 Go for the Throats, I'm pretty sure they had, right? Yeah, 3 Decay, 2 Go for the Throat. I feel like I would want to be focusing on Decay just a bit more, but of course, this is nothing to scoff at. Otherwise, interesting to see that Power Word Kill is chosen over Heartless Act as kind of like the secondary removal spell. I guess Doomblade effect, I should say. Go for the Throat is definitely the best, I think, in the meta right now. I don't think Power Word Kill is good just because it doesn't hit Mayhem Devil or Atraxa. Definitely less so Atraxa, just Devil. I always want to be hitting that card with my removal spells, and so I don't really like that too much, and I think I personally love Heartless Act, but of course, to each their own, right? But yeah, Bankbuster, really cool, just a one of, I think that's completely fine. In the mana base, 24 lands rather than 25 that Jay Woods went for, which I think I like. I think I prefer 24 lands, especially if we're just topping the curve out at Shieldred. But you could also say that like with these Field of Ruins that Jay Woods has been playing, we definitely want to be having more basics, and then that means of course more lands overall. So that's kind of like a separate discussion, but I think 24 is pretty stock for me at the moment, at least. And then I think this is I also really like this this mana base. Pretty, like, we kind of see like a lack of utility, like at least in the 5-0 lists. They've been just going like ham with the utility, like 2 Hive, 2 Castle, 2 Cottage, Beseju, Takenuma, Urborg, pretty much every utility land you could think of, which I think is fun. I think it's good to test out these types of things. And of course, like getting a robust concrete mana base is going to be really difficult overall, but I kind of don't mind. This kind of just 24 lands, kind of just like throw in a couple high, or just one high, a couple man lands, that is 1 Hive, 1 Lair, 1 Castle, and then just the rest. We see, so I guess, yeah, no Deathcap Glades, of course, 4 Blooming Marsh as well, which is very interesting to see instead of 3, which I think I've been liking as well. Yeah, but no Deathcap Glades, which is pretty neat. I guess with the 8/2 drops, we don't want to be seeing that card more often, and or I guess we want to be seeing that card less often, and more often we want to be seeing a card like Llanowar Wastes, which I pointed out before in the video, which I think I like in a deck that has more of like one source of mana in terms of the mana costs. So like, for example, here, like we see the Tortoise is kind of restrictive, but otherwise, the End, Shieldred, Liliana, these are double black costed spells. And of course we could see that here as well, even more so with Murderous Rider and Gix. And so I kind of like that with Llanowar Wastes, and Pathways for that matter as well. But I think overall, perhaps with this mana base, Doomwake would have been a bit more just safe overall, as we see with like the lack of utility lands overall. I think we could definitely be playing more. I think I'm not really sure about Lair of the Hydra. I'm not really I don't really like this card, especially with us being a Fatal Push Thoughtseize deck, but I could be wrong. I've just never liked it. But I think we could definitely be seeing more removal. Otherwise, I definitely like the Urborg, like Castle Locthwain has been a card that I haven't been really liking too much recently, just because it enters tapped so often, I feel like. And so I love the Urborgs, of course. Doomwake knows his responsibility of playing for Overgrown Tomb, so of course love to see that as well. And I think, yeah, pretty clean mana base overall, but can be a bit more focused on utility in my opinion. Moving to the sideboard, I love the sideboard. I think over, like, if I had to choose Jay Woods or Doomwake's sideboard, I would definitely go for Doomwake's. The 3 extinction events, I think, is pretty mandatory against mono green. Also great against Sacrifice. Also just has like utility elsewhere against humans or spirits or whatever. It's not going to be like a Ritual of Soot against humans, or like a Culling Ritual against Sacrifice, which would be like our Wrath effects of choice if we had to choose for those specific matchups. But Extinction Event, I think, just overall, with mono green being so popular, and then it being just like pretty decent elsewhere in the metagame, I think just Extinction Event, like triple Extinction Event, is pretty stock at this point. So I love that. I love that he's playing that and has kind of acknowledged that. 2 Duress makes a lot of sense. Also, like, kind of along those lines, he didn't opt for going Duress in the main deck, which I kind of like. You know, I don't really like Duress too much in the main deck. Can fool around with one, perhaps two copies, you know, if Jay Woods, you know, they got sixth, so there's a lot of stock in this for sure. But I think, personally speaking, I do prefer the Duresses in the sideboard. And then other than that, like, Leyline is pretty interesting, definitely for Phoenix, Greasefang, of course. Not really sure if it's too necessary. With the Lord Skitters, I guess we don't have Skoos in the main deck, and Shadow is our, you know, 2-drop of choice in that sense. And so I guess I could kind of see wanting Leyline in that sense, but I'm not really sure if it's too necessary. Yeah, especially with one Alliance Source I just saw, I feel like this may just be like too much graveyard hate overall. I think that the Bankbusters and the Invoke Despairs are really cool. I personally don't really like Bankbuster as a Rakdos matchup sideboard plan, just because they have a Braid and K command. I personally just like having like 2 or 3 Invokes in the sideboard. Invoke is really good elsewhere against like more niche like Krug of Fire's decks, or I guess just like Control as well can be decent against them. But yeah, I'm not really sure if Bankbuster is like really where we want to be going in that sense. Also with Thrun, I don't really like Thrun. I think, you know, just like this card like has always just been whatever for me, especially playing 24 lands. Having a 5-drop is kind of suspect. Of course, I just outlined my love for Invoke Despair, but I think like playing an Invoke Despair on turn 5 over a Thrun, I've just had so much more success with Invoke Despair over Thrun, and I think Invoke just has like a bit more utility in terms of just being a generic sideboard card, right? If that makes sense. Whereas Thrun is just like pretty much specifically for Rakdos and Control. And I don't think that Control is too much of a worry. It's always going to be present in the meta for sure, but it's not like it's an overwhelming presence for us. And especially in a deck like this, where we have such a low mana curve in terms of our creatures, that we can just really be the aggressor in the Control mashup and not really need a big 5-drop like this. So I'm not really sure if this is too necessary. Elsewhere, 2 Outland Liberator is really interesting. I guess this would be taking the slot of Terra Sunder, which I feel like I like Terra Sunder just a bit better, but I've never played Outland Liberator, so I'm not really sure how I feel about it. But really cool nonetheless. And I suppose can just be like a pretty cool utility focus card that we can even bring in against, like, obviously it's going to be good against the Fires of Avenge Index, or just any deck that is focused on artifacts and enchantments, but can be pretty decent at coming in against Rakdos, right? Just being like a Grizzly Bear that could flip into a more aggressive card that can just like get rid of a Fable if we need it, you know. It's of course not going to be like an incredible trade in that sense, but I think it's a pretty cool card nonetheless, and I definitely don't mind it. So yeah, overall, Doomwake, really cool. Really love to see, just like overall, really love to see these bigger content creators getting Golgari Midrange some exposure. So really cool, and of course congratulations to them for the 10th place challenge finish. Moving on though, I briefly wanted to point out a preliminary finish. This happened yesterday, so I guess at the time of recording, so the 3rd of October, by Poker's Wizard. This was just the same list that Jay Woods went 6th in the challenge with over the past weekend. And so, you know, in the prelim, it's definitely really cool to see. This is a 3rd place, so a 3-1 finish. So it's not a 4-0. So not like too good, not like, whoa, it's really impressive. But still quite impressive nonetheless, for sure. And of course, just a copy and paste from Jay Woods. So definitely cool. Definitely, like, I love to see this more so, and definitely puts a bit more stock in this list overall, just because we are getting pretty much 2 pretty difficult to achieve placements, which is, of course, you love to see with the same list, which is just very important. We just definitely want to be seeing more and more data, more and more consistent data with Golgari Midrange. Just that we've been lacking that so much recently. So really cool to see just overall more users playing the same list as well. I think if we're able to get anything from this video, it's that we should definitely, as a community, come across or try to come and find together a pretty cohesive list that we all think is going to be doing well, and then get some nice concrete testing as a result. And then, like, pretty much along those exact same lines, we have an RC in Calgary finish, a 16th place finish, 9-4 record by Carson Bell with Doomik's list. This happened on the 30th of September, whereas Doomik placed in the challenge on October 1st, so I guess he must have posted the list beforehand. I guess, probably a bit of a while beforehand if this person, registered it in a list or registered the list for an RC that far in advance. So, pretty cool to see for overall. I guess that means I should be, keeping up to date on what Doomik is up to, for sure. But yeah, just a copy and paste from Doomik's list. So love to see it. Love to see, of course, like in paper, really cool to see as well. Of course, like metagame's not going to be too far different between paper and online, but really love to see the versatility in that sense for whatever it's worth. And yeah, along the lines of what I just mentioned with Jay Woods and Poker's Wizard doing the same list, it's just so good that we're having these more concrete results, concrete and consistent results. You just love to see it, and it's really awesome. And then finally, I wanted to put my own deck list out there as a kind of representation of all the information we went through. With this list in specific, there's a lot that I usually love and that I have played countless times, on my own or on the channel before, and then some pretty new things that we've kind of figured out through going through this video, which I think is pretty fun, pretty interesting, and I'm pretty keen on trying them out for sure. So starting in the mana base, we have 24 lands over 25, which I do think I like, with no Field of Ruins. I know that's kind of, I said earlier that I love Field of Ruin. I just could not, I was just building this deck and I could not find space for them. We just have to have so many basics, and I didn't really want to go like one Field of Ruin because I felt like that was kind of lackluster and didn't really make too much sense thematically. Maybe that's what we could be doing, like one field, 3 basics is fine, over like the Urborg potentially, but I felt pretty comfortable with this list, and I think this is just a good starting point nonetheless. But Field of Ruin, I think, should be on our radar, and I think that it is pretty underrated, I think, overall, so we should definitely be considering that. But otherwise, 4 Blooming Marshes, which I think makes a lot of sense with this more, I guess, lower to the ground version, you could say, of the rock, with no nonsense like Questing Beast in the 4-drop slots. As you can see, I am used to playing 3 with this one copy I don't have. So, but I think moving forward, 4 is definitely where we want to be at. Kind of interestingly, along those lines, I am playing the Llanowar Wastes as a 2 of over the Deathcap Glades, I think, which we would be in this slot. I think, along the lines of being lower to the ground, Wastes makes more sense over Deathcap Glade. And then I think Glade is great in the late game, of course, but I think Wastes is a pretty, equal, it has equal significance as Glade does in the late game, just because we usually already have our colors under us, and then I don't think even if we don't, I don't think we would mind paying the 1 life, small amounts of times that we may need to do something like that. So I think that's fine. Moving into the utility, I guess the things of note here is we're not going with Restless Cottage. Neither of the users in the challenge, at least, Doomik and Jay Woods, went for Cottage, which I found to be pretty interesting. Cottage has been okay. I've been kind of liking it as a 1 of. I would play it over Urborg here. But yeah, no cottages between the 2 lists, which I think is pretty interesting, and I think I want to try that out as well, and just go with the 2 hives. Again, I don't like Lair. I don't think I'm going to be playing that card, and then 2 castles as well. I know I said before that castle has been more of a tap land, but I think without playing cottage and with playing the Urborg, the 2 swamps, which I think is pretty stock, and the 4 tombs, of course, I think going with 2 castle should be fine for the most part. By the way, this is the basic land count that Doomik has, and I think has been pretty stock in the community as well, just 2 swamps, 1 forest. I think for the most part makes a lot of sense. And then yeah, just Takenuma and Beseiju, 2 cards that I don't think I would ever cut, honestly. They've been surprisingly quite good for me. Just over the months that we've been playing with those cards. But yeah, finally moving on to the main deck, we could see, I guess we'll just start. I'm opting to go for 1 duress in the main, 2 in the sideboard. I'm not sure how I feel about this. Of course, in the past, I've kind of not liked doing this, but I definitely do want to try it out. And I was kind of honestly kind of hurting to try to find some last, like, 2 or 3 cards here, as not having the questing beasts, and then not having I guess like even more 2 drops or 3 drops. It was kind of difficult to find like the last 2 or 3 cards for the main deck. And so I think in that sense, if we're like struggling in that sense, I think duress is probably like the best pick we could go for. I'm not really sure like the theory behind that, but it just has always felt right for me. And I think that's, it's never like a bad inclusion, I would say. And if Jay Woods, went 6th in the challenge and that prelim, or was it I think it was the RC, whichever one, that was the copy paste from Jay Woods that placed as well pretty well, had the 2 duress. I think we should be keeping more of that on our radar. So I think I like this the one though. 2 drops are pretty yeah, I guess pretty new for me. Triple decay is very new for me, and I think I love that philosophy. 3 shadow, of course, for Dread Knights. I think shadow is just like the second best 2 drop, and I think we do want to be playing more 2 drops rather than like more interaction or more lands. Like that was kind of like the Jay Woods example, where they were playing 25 lands and then just a lot more interaction overall. I definitely do I think we want more creatures. I think we want more 2 drops overall. If anything, I would rather play a 2 drop than a 4 drop creature, just because going, I think, lower to the ground is always what we want to be doing. Keep in mind this is 16 creatures, which I feel like is relatively medium, if not low, of a creature count for us. And so I think that's pretty fine for us. Yeah, I think Shadow is really good. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. Shadow is really good. I think over Scoos at the moment, but that can change in the future. 2 Bankbuster, something I usually don't try out in the main deck, but want to be doing. Trophy. So this is another conversation which I didn't touch on in the analysis. Neither of the lists were playing Trophy. I am a pretty big proponent of a card like this, at least just having one of in the 75 somewhere, I think is pretty nice for us. And I think like this is a card that people really get easily scared of when playing, and rightly so, to be honest. And of course, this is just like, take all this with a grain of salt. But I really like Trophy. I just love the versatility. Trophy has been very, very powerful for me in the past, and I think more times than not has been powerful than just like the downside being very present for me. And so I think I don't mind it. I think going with more decays over like edicts makes a lot more sense for Trophy, because then our like control matchup, for example, gets a lot worse than because then at that point all of our removal is dead, just because decay is really bad against control, and then of course the Doomblade effects are quite bad against them as well. And then we don't have edict as well, which is I think pretty premium, I guess I would have to say, in that matchup. And so I think I definitely like Trophy. Of course, this is going to be probably a card that is going to be heavily debated for all of its eternity, if the Rock becomes more of a presence in the meta right now. But I think I like it. I think I'm one of the supporters for sure. It's such a versatile card that it just feels right playing, at least as a one-of, right? I'm not sure if I would go over 1. I've played like 3 in the past, and which has been like okay. I think that's just not right though at the moment. And I do like my decays, which I explained before. Moving on to the 3 drops. I guess we could start with Liliana's. I think 3 is great. Doomik was playing 3, Jay Woods was playing 4. I think I like 3, of course. 3 Glissa stock as well. And then Trespasser. Trespasser we didn't see in either list. Doomik was playing Lord Skitter over Trespasser, I assume. I think Trespasser is probably just like the better card overall. Life loss is definitely a worry with Dread Whispers, Thoughtseize, Tomb, Castle, Glissa, and now Landwar Wastes. And I think, you know, to kind of mitigate those consequences, I think having the Trespasser life gain is good, and I think we should be looking more into things like that. I think when considering like life loss overall, we shouldn't worry too much, just because if that life loss means we have more cards, like, you know, in the case of Glissa or Castle or Dread Whispers, it usually means that we're going to be getting ahead, and I'm not too worried in most cases. And so I think, like, I wouldn't play Scoos, you know, for example. I don't think I would play a lower power level card like that, but I think Trespasser is pretty, like, moderately powered right now in the meta, where I'm not excited to play it, but I'm definitely not unexcited to play it either. And so and, you know, of course, the life gain is not irrelevant, as I just pointed out. And so I think that I'm not afraid of playing a card like this, and it's just pretty decent. Just a decent creature that, like, if we're not going to be playing like the 4th Shadow in the main deck, or more 4-drop creatures, I think Trespasser is where I want to be at. And so, you know, I think that makes sense. Yeah, and then of course 3 shielded, not 4. I think 4 is probably, in my eyes, not extremely correct, not extremely streamlined when I envision what I would want to see out of midrange, Golgari midrange, that is. I think 3 is probably fine for us, and we shouldn't have to worry about that too much. Yeah, and then finally, moving on to the sideboard, we have a lot of 1-ofs, some 2-ofs, and then the 3 extinction events. So I guess I would like to start probably just like with the Shadow. I love having the 4th Shadow in the sideboard, or at least recently I've been, just because great against green, great against sacrifice. You could even bring this again in against control and it not be terrible, just as an extra 2-drop to get in damage early on. And yeah, I think, like, I definitely don't like it in the main deck like Doomwake had, but I think in the sideboard makes just a bit more sense to me. Edict, good against control, like I pointed out, and is just like an extra removal spell, kind of like more of a catch-all. Not as good as Trophy, of course, in that sense, but I think the most catch-all removal spell that I feel comfortable playing, I guess, in the sideboard. Liliana for, like, I love this against creativity, of course, controls, midrange, Lotus Field as well, Path of Peril against like humans. Pithing Needle can come in and against a variety of matchups, of course, the main one being green, that is also pretty decent against control, pretty weak against their marches, unfortunately, but I think is elsewhere pretty good. And then, like, if we're going to be coming coming against Greasefang, the odds time that we do come across that deck, Pithing Needle is actually pretty premium, so I definitely do not mind having that just as a one-of. Terra Sunder, you know, just great overall flexibility. License Hearse, just because Phoenix is a bit popular right now, and then can come in against Rakdos, just because I've noticed Kroxa is becoming a bit more of a problem for us when we're not playing Scoos in the main deck, for example. And then Ashiok, like I said, just great against Lotus Field, pretty much a hoser against them, I think, in most cases. And then decent against, you know, Phoenix, Greasefang, Graveyard decks in general. Or even, like, does this get Bring to Light? I'm not sure if it does, but good in that case as well, right? Yeah, I touched on the dresses, events, and then Invoke Despair pretty much just for Rakdos, and then usually I like having 1, sometimes 2 against mono green. You don't want to like over sideboard against mono green. I know this is kind of like a lot of sideboard cards against them. If we're like going like with these 7 cards against mono green, I think I definitely always want to be prepared, and I think I feel most comfortable with having at least these 4 cards against them as just like a decent plan, where of course event, like I said, can come in against humans, can come against spirits, and be just okay. Sacrifice as well, and just be not incredibly like perfect. It's definitely not going to be the perfect Wrath effect against them, but it is the perfect Wrath effect against mono green, and so I think that's you know, being just a decent Wrath effect against those other decks is going to be pretty fine for us, and pretty just like the best we can do without having like Damnation in the format. And then yeah, Mystery Shadow, like I pointed out, I think I love as well. So I know, very long-winded video. If you've got it to the end here. Thank you so much. You're a real one, and I definitely do appreciate you. And yeah, let me know your thoughts. This was a pretty long video, and I usually don't just kind of go off the cuff like this. It felt really good though, so let me know like how you perceive this format of the video, besides just like letting me know your thoughts about the my analysis of the lists in general, and then my list as well. Yeah, of course, thank you guys so much for the support. The channel is kind of really taking off, so I guess taking off for like what, 600 something subscribers, so not too much, but like it feels good, and we definitely have a really solid community. So I'm definitely very fortunate to have you guys as a really cool community in this YouTube space overall. So really thank you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much.